Hey, it's Charlie Craven back again, and this month I'm going to tie Dave Chenard's Halo Shrimp. Dave's a guy from down in Florida. He's got some really cool saltwater patterns with some new techniques in them, so we're going to sit down and tie one up. This will be in the April-May edition, so check it out there, or sit down and watch right now. Today I'm going to tie for you Chewy's Halo Shrimp. This is a pretty unique pattern from Dave Chenard, who is the Florida and Southern States Umpqua rep. And while this looks like a sort of standard bonefish pattern, the cool thing about this, the innovative part about this fly, is if you look there in the middle, is that inverting tungsten bead that he's using for weight. That's the whole key to this whole system. Dave's got a whole series of flies called Survive Entry, and rather than using conventional bead chain or lead eyes to weight the fly, Dave has used these sort of offset tungsten beads to apply weight to the fly that makes the fly cast a lot easier and sink a lot faster and land much softer. Pretty unique way of going about it, and so we're going to tie one of these up. Now, obviously you could use this weighting method on any variety of flies, so kind of keep that in mind as you watch this. I'll walk you through this fly, but keep in mind how you could apply that weighting method to a variety of different patterns. So I'm going to start here with an Umpqua XS410, and this is a saltwater hook. This is in a size 4. Like I said, we're going to tie a bonefish fly, and I'm going to use some 6/0 uni thread in pink. Dave likes to use 140 denier UTC, which I do have, but I just like the 6/0 uni a little bit better. It doesn't spread out quite as much. So what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to start the thread here just behind the eye, and I'm going to dress the hook shank all the way down. Just a nice smooth thread base all the way down. You can see this hook's got kind of a funky bend, kind of a sharp angle here. So I'm going to go about a quarter of the way down that, and then I'll come back to just about the hook point, just short of the hook point there. And what I'll do now is I'm going to take a piece of 012 mono, and really just about anything will work here. You want something fairly heavy enough that it's not going to wear through, but just about any size mono will work. And what I'll do here is I'm going to take the end of this and pinch it with my pliers, about a 1/4 inch long or so. Pinch that with my D-bar pliers so that I flatten the end. And what that'll let me do is tie this down a little more cleanly so that I don't have any bulk out of it. Just anchor that down. Then I'm going to take, this is a 3.3 millimeter tungsten bead. I'll try to hold this up here where you can see this a little bit better. Actually, this will show better on the hook. Get my fat fingers out of the way. What I'm going to do with this bead, anyway, is thread it on the mono. And now you can get a better view of what that bead looks like. You can see it's sort of oval shaped. The idea of that bead on a conventional competition style fly is that it sits away from the hook shank, so it puts the weight out away from the hook, and allows the weight of the bead to flip the hook over. That's the whole idea behind this fly, is it's going to turn this fly over very easily without adding a lot of weight to the pattern. So I'm going to take that bead and line that up just about middle of the hook. I'm going to go a couple more turns here. And then I'm going to come in just on the other side of that bead, and I'll flatten that mono again. You can see I'm just pinching it flat. And I'll hold that bead up, just jump my thread to the front side, and anchor that down. Then I can come in and trim that mono out. So that is how you apply the bead. Now, some of Dave's patterns have more than one bead, so obviously you can adjust sizes. You can use a big one, a small one, 2 big ones, whatever you need to do to get the weight where you need it to be, depending on the depth of the water. But that's how it's applied. That's the magic to it right there. Pretty simple, but pretty clearly a good idea. So with that, now we're going to go about tying the rest of the fly. And for this Chewy's Halo Shrimp, we're going to start with, for the kind of back end tail of the fly, we're going to take a small clump of tan Arctic fox fur. like so. And I'm going to pull out most of these shorter guard hairs. I just want sort of a ragged little clump, and it's not going to take near as much of this as you tend to think. But I'll take that clump and I'll measure it about a shank length long. And I'm going to tie this in down here at the end of my thread base, right up on top of the hook, and I want to anchor that tightly in place, like so. And then I'll hold those butt ends up and trim those sort of at an angle so that I can smoothly transition. And the reason we tied those down around the bend there is so that the tail does sort of point up. This fly ultimately will ride inverted, so we want this fly to sort of be canted toward the top side. So now I'm going to take some Chacon's crusher legs, and these are brown clear, just a single strand, and you can see I moved my thread back a bit, and I'm going to catch this strand at the middle of its length, and then I'll grab both ends, and I can sort of straddle them on the hook shank as I wrap back over them right up to the base of that tail. So we've got a crusher leg on either side, and I'll just clip those back here in my material clip to hold them out of the way. We're going to add a little bit of modeling here, and to do that we're going to use this Barred Predator wrap from Greg Senyo. This is Barred UV. Let me get this up here where you can see it. You can see it's a type of mylar flash that's got some modeling to it, and I'm just going to take 2 or 3 strands. It's not going to take very much. Take 2 or 3 strands. If you just go a single strand, it's so thin it hardly shows up. So I'm going to take 2 or 3 strands, and same idea here. I'm going to tie them in at the center of their length and fold them over and wrap back over to the base of that tail so that I've got those sort of modeled fibers hanging out back there. And then I'm going to take just a single strand of root beer crystal flash and do the same thing. Lay that in, fold it over, and come back over it. Now the ultimate length of this I don't worry too much about just now. That's going to be all trimmed to length later. So I've laid that in. And now I'm going to take, for the mouth parts on this fly, I'm going to take a piece of small mylar tubing, and this piece is pearl. Dave's pattern calls for orange, but orange is hard to find. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece of pearl and I'm going to tie this in so it's about maybe a ½ inch long, hanging off the back of the hook, right on top of everything we've tied down there. I'll trim that out, and then I'm going to take an orange Sharpie marker and just hit that. You can see I don't have to go in there real aggressively. I can just sort of wave the marker around a bit and give that some coloration to give it that little sort of hot spot, like so. Now we're going to tie the eyes in. Now these eyes, let me get a set here so that you can see them, are just super fun and easy. What I've done here, let's go ahead and make one for you. What I've done here is I've got a piece of that same 012 mono, and I'm going to thread an extra small glass bead onto the mono. I'm going to try to do this where you can see it up here. And what I have found works best for me is I'm going to hold that bead up about a ¼ inch from the end of that mono, and then I'll take my cigarette lighter and melt that mono and let it just run down to the bead, and then I'll push the bead right up onto the mono. Hopefully that showed. I had to avoid the flame there as I went, but you can see it leaves a little pupil in the middle of the eye. Then I'll take my Copic marker and I'm going to color the end of that mono, just that pupil section, black with my Copic marker. And then finally, I'm going to take and add just a bit of UV resin over the top of the bead onto the monostock and just kind of round everything out. This is how you create the eyes for this fly. And then I'll use my UV light to cook that in place, and you can see obviously it's best to do these all ahead of time so that you've got your eyes all pre-made. But there's our finished eye, And I'll just set that one aside to use for the next one. Get my resin out of the way. And now we'll actually tie these eyes in. So what I've got here is I've done 2 eyes on either end of this piece of mono. So I'm going to cut this in half. And I'll even the two eyes up and then cut the mono. It's about a 1/2 inch long. And I want to flatten the ends using those same D-bar pliers. I want to flatten the ends a bit. And again, this is just to cut down on the bulk that we've got tied to the hook. I'll set one eye aside for the moment. I'm going to tie one end on my near side by that flattened mono. And these eyes should extend just past the bend of the hook. Sort of bend them and angle them out a little bit so that that distance is shortened. Get one on the far side, and by cutting those to the same length, I know that they're going to be even at the back if they're even at the front, where I started the tie-in. We'll kind of prop those out a bit, even prop them down, like so. So that's the complicated part of this fly. From here on out, it goes pretty easily. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a tan saddle hackle feather, and you sort of have to gauge one. You want one that's well tapered, and I like the little bit webbier feathers just to create more of a leggy look. But I've trimmed the butt end, just some little bristles onto the butt end there, and I'm going to tie this in by its butt end back here at the bend of the hook. I'm going to anchor that in place. And then for the body, I've got some flat diamond braid, and this is dyed orange. I'm going to tie this in just in front of the bead here, wrap over it to the base of the tail, and then just continue right on up to the hook eye. Now at this point I like to add, because we've got so many things tied in there, I like to add a little shot of head cement along the hook shank here. And I'll start to wrap this diamond braid. Right up to the bead, just cross on the bottom and continue along. You can see I didn't really try to build anything up. We've got our taper built in there from tying the materials down. That braid is mostly for color. You can see it adds a little texture to it, but really didn't bulk anything up. Now I'm going to take my saddle feather, and I like to fold at least the first part of this. And I'll show you, this is sort of a tricky little fly, or tricky little technique on this fly. I'm going to fold the first part of this saddle feather, and I'm going to go 2 or 3 turns on this back half of the body, right up to the bead. And the feather tends to want to twist as you come around the bead, which is not the end of the world. You can sort of remedy that here in a minute. I'm going to keep these nice and evenly spaced, hopefully. You can see I'm just folding the feather as I go. Then I'll tie that feather off just behind the hook eye. That feather behaves pretty well. You can see most of it's sloping toward the bend. Obviously you could tie this with more wraps or less wraps depending on what you were after there. And then I just use my dubbing brush to kind of sweep these fibers back. That's a self-defense effort so that I don't end up with that sharp hook point stuck in my fingers. But what I'll do now is I'm going to take and just pinch those hackle fibers down along the hook shank and just squeeze them in. And what that'll do, you can see that slopes those hackle fibers back, and it seats that stem into the braid so everything's swept back. Now I'm going to reach in under the bend here, and I'm going to trim all of these fibers from the bottom of the fly darn near flush. I'm going to get as close as I can get. About like so. And what that's going to do is clear a little path for our wing that we're about to add. If you leave those fibers in there, especially if they're a little stiff or standing a little more upright, they can kind of prop the wing up at too high an angle. So we want to clean that up a little bit. Now I like to just take the hook out of my vise and turn it over. If you've got a rotary vise, now's the time to use that rotary feature. So So you can kind of see what we've got there, and a little more shrimpy looking at this point. I've got most of my fibers trimmed off pretty well there. So finally I'm going to take another clump of that Arctic Fox. And again, it's really this is a really dense fur. It's easy to overdo. So don't get too much. And what I'll do here is kind of pull some of that under fur out. Thin this down even a little bit more. Any of your extra long guard hairs, you want to peel those out as well. And I'm going to lay this in and measure it just about another quarter shank past the hook bend. I'll lay this in on top of that hook eye and anchor that down just behind the eye. 3 or 4 turns there. So you can see the wing is a little short. The idea of that wing is it's going to sort of bleed into that tail section, so we'll get some continuity there. I'll lift these butt ends up and trim those off flush. Just sort of clean that up a bit. And then my favorite part apparently is this last single strand of root beer crystal flash, because I've tied a couple dozen of these now and I seem to forget this every time, but the finishing touch is just a single strand of root beer crystal flash. I'm going to catch this on top of the thread head and draw this back, and this is just to top the wing here. I'll build my thread head now, just smooth and easy. Don't really have a whole lot tied off there, so not much thread work needed. And then I'll whip finish that. Nice smooth whip finish. And then I'll come in and add just a bit of head cement here to lock everything down. You want to make sure you get all the way around the hook with that coat of head cement. And then I'm going to take and turn this around so you can kind of see his long ends. And I like to pinch this in pinch the eye of the hook in my vise. I'm going to bump him over just a bit here so that you can get a little more clear view. There we go. And then we'll do just some final trimming here. So I'm going to kind of lay everything down where it needs to go, and I'll start with the crusher legs. I'm going to trim those about just a bit more than a shank length long. Try to get them both about the same length. That Senyo barred wrap is about the right length to start with, so I'm just going to trim off those first 2 crystal flash antennas and then the topping so that everything sort of staggers down evenly. You can see how creepy and shrimpy that is. And then I can kind of get those eyes repositioned. I kind of mashed them up on my vise. And that is Chewy's Halo Shrimp. Pretty slick design, pretty good idea on that inverting tungsten bead. I can see using this on a variety of different streamers and stillwater flies rather than having the fly weighted at the eye where it's going to jig up and down. This fly is going to ride a lot more evenly in the water, a lot more horizontally. You can actually slow the sink rate, allowing that surface area to be maintained horizontally rather than eye down where you've got much less to slow the sink rate. A lot more controllable, I think, too. I'm pretty impressed with this idea, and I really do think this is going to change the way we do things. Pay attention to this. This is something that's this is a big thing. This is a good idea. I like it. I'm gonna start playing with this a lot more on a lot more of my patterns, and I'm sure you're going to see something where I borrowed Dave's idea. Dave's a cool guy. He's really fun to talk to. A wealth of information. So if you ever get the chance, don't pass that up.